Tyrion Lannister's life might have been very different had he never left the rocky crags of his birth. The golden spires and crimson banners of Casterly Rock would have been his cradle and home, his sanctuary and prison, his everything. And in this alternate path, the imp found himself forging a fate woven with far more subtlety and quiet might than the tumultuous heights and humiliations he would have faced in King's Landing or elsewhere. Here, beneath the lion's den that sat upon the biggest gold mine in Westeros, Tyrion's cunning and wit would change House Lannister and the Seven Kingdoms in unexpected ways. This is the story of how Tyrion kept his short legs grounded on the stony foundation of his ancestral seat, never climbing into the swirl of southern politics, yet never once losing that secret brilliance that made him the keenest mind of his generation. From his earliest memories, the scent of sea air mingled with the faint tang of iron in the corridors of Casterly Rock. He could taste brine on his lips on those occasions he was allowed outside. Though his father, Tywin Lannister, rarely permitted him to roam unsupervised, Tyrion remembered fondly the times he managed to slip away. The sea below the rock would churn and murmur like some ancient beast, and he would stand there, a tiny figure dwarfed by the colossal cliff walls, eyes wide with a childish longing for knowledge and adventure. To Tyrion, even the halls of this grand fortress were an endless labyrinth waiting to be explored. His brother Jaime was always the golden prince of the family. Easy smile, athletic grace, and the perfect Lannister hair. Cersei was the bright daughter Tywin cherished, though she possessed a cruelty and vanity to match that beauty. And Tyrion, well, Tyrion was born twisted and small, his mother dying in childbirth, and Tywin never quite let him forget that. But there was a certain resourcefulness to Tyrion, a certain quiet resilience. He grew up reading every book he could get his stubby little hands on, hauling around tomes and arms that could barely manage their weight, devouring the words by torchlight in the more shadowy corners of the library. Before he was 10, he had read volumes on the history of the Rhoynar, the wars fought by the First Men, the conquests of the Undulls, and enough on dragon lore to spin the heads of grown maesters. Each story lived within him, fueling a fierce curiosity about the wider world. Yet, in this variation of fate, that curiosity remained largely tied to the rock, never given the chance to flourish in the labyrinth of King's Landing. He could dream of the Red Keep or the Free Cities, but in truth, his life's tapestry was almost entirely woven into the stone of his own home. And so, Tyrion found other ways to keep his mind alive. His father assigned him tasks he thought trivial, managing small trade accounts, ensuring the kitchens were provisioned properly, or running the occasional inventory of the mines. At first, these duties felt like an insult, demeaning chores for the deformed youngest child. But soon Tyrion began to see them as something else entirely, an opportunity. What Tywin viewed as menial tasks gave Tyrion an intimate look at the details that kept Casterly Rock functioning. He saw how the gold flowed, how the traders negotiated. He saw how things that seemed minor, like the price of grain in one region or the rumor of a new iron source in another, could ripple through trade networks, raising or lowering fortunes like a tide. He became adept at reading ledgers, predicting outcomes, and noticing patterns other men overlooked. He would scrawl notes in tiny script. When he managed to fit in some private time at the library or while perched by a flickering brazier in his own cramped chamber, he would revise these notes, try to fill in the gaps with reasoned speculation, and connect them to a broader context he gleaned from musty scrolls or half-forgotten footnotes in bigger tomes. In time, the unglamorous chores he did for his father became the building blocks of a sprawling mental web Tyrion used to understand how money and influence trickled through the Westerlands. He recognized that the lions of House Lannister needed gold for everything from forging weapons to forging alliances, and if one understood the flow of gold, one understood power. He never openly boasted of what he knew. Perhaps if Tyrion had lived in King's Landing, he would have had cause to show off or defend his worth. But buried in Casterly Rock, overshadowed by Jaime's martial prowess and Cersei's ambitions, Tyrion found safety in invisibility. Guards dismissed him, lords barely acknowledged him, and servants whispered behind his back but made little effort to understand his quiet presence. Over time, Tyrion became like a watchful gargoyle perched in the corners of halls and feast rooms, soaking in all he observed. Some, especially Cersei, would say such a life was not living at all. But Tyrion drew comfort from it. When you are rarely noticed, you can see everything in plain sight. And knowledge, Tyrion had learned, was the mightiest weapon in all of Westeros, sharper than Valyrian steel, more valuable than gold, and more subversive than any rebel army. He was on the cusp of manhood when the first event of true significance shifted in his life, his father's departure for King's Landing. Tywin was to serve King Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King, as hand. The stories of that time never mentioned Tyrion traveling with Tywin, Jaime, and Cersei to the royal court. But let us imagine this crucial turning point in a new light. In this version, Tywin, certain that his malformed younger son would be more of an embarrassment than an asset, demanded Tyrion remain at Casterly Rock to learn how to make yourself useful to the family. Tyrion was effectively exiled to his birthplace as Jaime and Cersei left to dazzle the capital. This was precisely the moment that determined the shape of Tyrion's destiny. Without his father's oppressive presence, Tyrion assumed he might finally find a certain freedom. Yet, ironically, Tywin was replaced by the rock itself. The fortress was more than a set of walls. It was centuries of tradition, wealth, and expectations. And House Lannister, with its old stewards, maesters, and loyal men-at-arms, watched over him with an unyielding gaze. No, he was not physically free to roam the Seven Kingdoms, but there was still enough leeway for him to quietly expand his knowledge of governance. He took over more significant financial records. He spoke with goldsmiths, learned from the master of stables how the cavalry was maintained, and questioned the castellan about the complexities of managing a garrison of knights, squires, and guards. In those days, conflict loomed in the realm, tensions rising between the Targaryens and the rest of Westeros. Rebels came in whispers first, then in outbursts of violence. Word reached Casterly Rock that Lord Robert Baratheon in the Stormlands was forging alliances with the Eyrie, the North, and the Riverlands. Houses great and small were positioning themselves for a war that might or might not happen. Tyrion listened to letters read by the maester, eavesdropped on every rumor drifting through the fortress, and soon recognized that while his father might be loyal, or at least apparently loyal, to King Aerys for the moment, cunning Tywin Lannister would never put the Lannister name at risk unnecessarily. But with Tywin in King's Landing, it was Tyrion who saw firsthand how the common folk of the Westerlands reacted to the possibility of a war on their doorstep. Men from the mountains near Lannisport came to Casterly Rock, pleading for help against rogue bandits. The militia needed more steel. The farmers needed better roads. These were small problems, perhaps, but Tyrion oversaw them with a dedication that surprised those who had once mocked him. He didn't promise solutions he could not deliver, but he negotiated with local blacksmiths to produce extra arms at fair prices, and he quietly authorized some funds for improvements to roads, which would serve a double function of allowing better troop movement for the Lannisters and encouraging safer trade for the local populace. Each of these actions might seem trivial, but for the people who lived in the Westerlands, it was more aid than they had received in a long time, especially from a Lannister. The shift did not happen overnight, but Tyrion, for the first time, felt what it was like to wield some measure of real power, to use his wits to help, not just to survive. And there was a strange satisfaction in hearing peasants and local traders remark, "The imp did right by us," in hushed, surprised tones. He would stand in the shadows of the courtyard or in the candlelit gloom of the library, a small half-smile on his face, and know that it was something worth cherishing. Years passed with the uncertainty of the realm turning to full-blown rebellion, Robert's Rebellion. Jaime and Cersei were off in King's Landing. Jaime served in the King's Guard. Cersei navigated the politics of the Red Keep, rumored to be vying for the prince's affections. Tywin, cunning as ever, stepped back at the right time, letting the Mad King's downfall become inevitable before sweeping in to claim reward and retribution. And so the Targaryens fell, the new King Robert ascended the Iron Throne, and the realm underwent a seismic shift. Yet through it all, Tyrion remained behind in Casterly Rock, orchestrating shipments of gold to support Lannister armies, reviewing casualty lists to plan for the future, and constantly analyzing what the conflicts meant for the house's standing. When the war ended, Tywin returned briefly to Casterly Rock with Jaime and Cersei. Yet they did not remain long. Tywin was more concerned about his continuing role in the capital and how House Lannister could remain close to the new king. Jaime, favored knight and hero for slaying the Mad King, or so many would brand him in hushed words, though it was not an official title, returned to King's Landing for prestigious duties. Cersei, now married to King Robert, a move that Tywin had orchestrated for the further glory of House Lannister, also dwelled in the Red Keep's gilded misery. And Tyrion, again, a ghost in his own ancestral home, stayed behind. It was during this period that Tyrion's governance of the Westerlands truly flourished. With Tywin gone, the daily matters of the territory needed real attention. Tyrion, never officially named Lord, was recognized by many as the de facto manager of Casterly Rock and the broad Westerlands around it. Old lion banners flapped in the salt wind along the ramparts, and each day, Tyrion would attend council in the Great Hall, receiving petitions, arbitrating local disputes, and issuing edicts in his father's name, though Tywin barely noticed, as long as the gold kept flowing to him in King's Landing when demanded. Now, had Tyrion left with them, had he served as Hand of the King or Master of Coin or anything else in that glittering snake pit, the Seven Kingdoms would have known a very different Tyrion. But none of that came to pass. Instead, he honed his craft among the Lannister bannermen. He recognized that the Lannister hold over these lands wasn't solely about raw power. It was about forging loyalty. Yes, gold was vital, but trust, ironically, was also a currency. And Tyrion, ridiculed though he was by many of his fellow nobles, discovered that he had a gift for forging alliances of mutual benefit. He never demanded respect through intimidation. He granted a fair hearing to small folk and lords alike. He was quick-witted in negotiations, swift to placate offended egos without losing face, and adept at ensuring that all parties walked away feeling they had won something. In time, he developed relationships with houses like the Craycalls, the Swifts, the Leffords, and the farm holders scattered along the Gold Road. Wherever possible, he integrated them into trade initiatives or used the near-limitless gold reserves of Casterly Rock to foster goodwill. When the harvest was poor one season, Tyrion orchestrated a network of food distribution that prevented mass starvation and kept crime in check. When a rebellious group from the mountainous corners tried to raid Lannister caravans, Tyrion coordinated with local bannermen to stamp out the threat, but also provided them an avenue for negotiation if they laid down arms. He was not fool enough to think himself beloved. He was, after all, a Lannister with that proud golden lion on his banners. And he was a dwarf, which drew stares and prejudices. But he did garner a reputation for fairness that was near unheard of among the notoriously proud and ruthless Lannister line. Gradually, even the rock itself seemed to open to him. Rather than scurrying through hidden passages, Tyrion strode confidently among the corridors. When visiting lords came, they were greeted by a man of short stature but surprisingly magnanimous presence. He offered them glasses of the best Arbor Gold or strong Dornish Reds if that was their preference, chatted about trade routes, and displayed a vast knowledge of the realm's current events that bordered on the uncanny. Some of them left shaking their heads, marveling that they had been bested in conversation or negotiation by the one they derided as the Imp. And so, as the realm stabilized under King Robert's rule, with the watchful presence of Tywin Lannister behind the scenes, Tyrion shaped the Westerlands into something more unified, more prosperous. He introduced new trade pacts with the Reach and brokered shipping lanes out of Lannisport for wine and refined metals, ensuring a steady stream of revenue. Such day-to-day achievements never made the songs of bards, but Tyrion didn't mind. He took solace in his personal library, expanded now with rare manuscripts from Essos that he acquired through correspondences with merchants. He took comfort in a close circle of advisors, men like Ser Bronn, an odd mercenary-turned-knight who found Tyrion's gold good enough to stay loyal for years, and a handful of capable stewards and scribes who recognized Tyrion's brilliance and served him with unwavering devotion. All the while, he received letters, albeit rarely, from Jaime. His brother remained his one link of genuine affection in the family. Cersei's letters, full of condescension and venomous insinuations, he sometimes read with amusement, sometimes with heartbreak, before tossing them into the hearth. Tywin's letters were purely transactional. Demands for updates, instructions for collecting further taxes, instructions for how to quell potential unrest. Tyrion followed them when they seemed logical, modified them when they didn't, and carefully measured how much to reveal of his own initiatives. Even across the miles, Tyrion still felt his father's shadow looming over him. And then Joffrey was born, and Myrcella and Tommen, children of Cersei and King Robert, though court whispers often cast doubt on the paternity. Tyrion heard tales of Joffrey's cruelty, Myrcella's innocence, and Tommen's good nature. He wondered sometimes what role he might have played in their lives had he gone to King's Landing. Would he have become the kindly uncle who guided them toward wisdom? Or would he have been drowned out by court intrigues and Tywin's demands just as everyone else was? He could only speculate, and when letters arrived from King's Landing, the glimpses they provided into the shape of that life only fueled his curiosity. The years moved on. Robert's boisterous rule carried on with endless feasts and hunts, and though the crown was deeply in debt, House Lannister often picked up the tab. Tyrion, from afar, kept the Westerlands flush with gold and influence, so Tywin could afford to humor the king's spendthrift ways. Yet tension simmered beneath the surface. The Targaryen exiles across the narrow sea, rumors of black magic, of assassinations. And within the capital, the king's small council grew rife with factionalism: Lord Varys, Peter Baelish, Stannis Baratheon, Renly Baratheon, and more. Tyrion's glimpses of these tensions came through coded letters or passing mentions from envoys. If in another life he might have stepped into that world, this time he stayed well away, building his quiet power base at home. A critical turning point came during the Greyjoy Rebellion. Balon Greyjoy declared himself king of the Iron Islands, launching raids along the western coast. Tywin swiftly commanded that Tyrion reinforce the fleet from Lannisport, coordinate the Lesser Lords, and drive the Ironborn back. For the first time, Tyrion felt the weight of war on his shoulders, not just as a source of funds or logistics, but as a strategist. He called upon the houses loyal to Lannister. Men like the Farmans, the Marbrands, and the Bayforts. Together they formed a blockade in the Seoff case and Lannisport. Tyrion gathered intelligence through captured Ironborn raiders and from spy masters who worked for House Lannister. He realized quickly that the Ironborn, though fierce, were fractious. They respected only strength. Tyrion had them lured into narrow channels where Lannister ships waited, armed with scorpions and flaming arrow volleys. He paid local fisherfolk to feed false information, leading the Ironborn to believe that a significant portion of the Lannister fleet was somewhere else entirely. When the Ironborn launched what they thought would be a surprise attack on Lannisport's harbor, Tyrion's trap was sprung. The sea burned red with the fires from tar-coated weapons. Ironborn longships, swift but lightly armored, found themselves caught in a gauntlet of archers and ballistae. Tyrion's plan was brutal but effective. In one swift blow, nearly a third of Balon Greyjoy's raiding force was destroyed or captured. Jaime, on behalf of the crown, led a separate land campaign and inflicted a crushing defeat on Pike itself. Altogether, the Greyjoy Rebellion was put down. The Iron Islands were forced to bend the knee. In the aftermath, Tyrion's name was actually spoken with respect in the Westerlands. Some even lauded him as a cunning architect of victory. While the realm at large credited King Robert, Stannis, and even Jaime with the final blow within the stony halls of Casterly Rock, Tyrion's contribution was not forgotten. He had made himself more than just a steward or caretaker. He had proven he could think in terms of grand strategy as well as day-to-day governance. Yet victory never comes without cost. The harbors of Lannisport bore the scars of the Ironborn assault, and Tyrion oversaw a massive reconstruction effort, channeling gold to rebuild ships and restore damaged quays. In doing so, he cemented the loyalty of the Lannisport shipbuilders and merchants. He established new tariffs that balanced the cost of the rebuilding across the entire Westerlands, explaining to the lords that a stronger Lannisport was vital to them all. He navigated the grumbling with a mix of flattery and intimidation, a technique he had perfected by listening to the best and worst of Tywin's tactics. Ultimately, the reconstruction was a success. Lannisport emerged stronger, its defenses bolstered, and its ties to Casterly Rock more secure than ever. Tyrion reached his 30th named day around this period, a milestone he greeted with a mixture of wry humor and quiet sorrow. The hair around his temples had begun to show faint hints of silver, though his face still held the mischievous lines of youth. He had never married, never sired children. Romantic attachments were fleeting at best. He had no illusions about his physical limitations or the scorn many highborn ladies felt for him. He sampled the pleasures of the flesh in discreet ways. Their the occasional dalliances with willing courtesans or the occasional lady bored with her aging husband. But Tyrion never let himself be deluded into believing in love. How could he, when his father had made it clear from the start that Tyrion's entire existence was an offense to House Lannister? Still, a lonely ache sometimes crept into his nights, especially when the fires burned low, the wind howled around the rock, and the only company he had was a dusty volume of ancient lore. In those moments, Tyrion would sip a fine vintage of wine, Run his fingers across the scars in the wooden table from generations past, and imagine a life outside these walls. Perhaps that was why he poured so much of himself into making the Westerlands flourish. If he could not have love or a father's approval, maybe he could at least leave a legacy of prosperity and stability. Maybe one day, centuries hence, the maesters would write of Tyrion Lannister, the dwarf who quietly transformed the fortunes of his house. When King Robert died, in a hunting accident, they said, the realm plunged once more into chaos. Joffrey ascended as king. Cersei's manipulations in the court soared to new heights, and rumors about the boy king's true parentage spread like wildfire. The War of the Five Kings erupted, with Robb Stark in the north, Renly and Stannis in the south, and even Balon Greyjoy attempting to take advantage of the strife once again. Tyrion watched from the vantage point of Casterly Rock, receiving letter after letter demanding gold, men, and arms to support Joffrey's cause. Tywin commanded him to hold the Westerlands firm and to ensure steady shipments of gold to supply Lannister forces that were now mobilizing across the Riverlands. Yet something was different this time. Tyrion felt it in his bones. Joffrey was a cruel and reckless king. Cersei was cunning but blinded by maternal pride and her own sense of superiority. The Lannisters seemed unstoppable to many, but Tyrion saw their vulnerabilities. He saw how the alliances Tywin had built might crack under the weight of Joffrey's mercurial rule. He knew the North was led by a fierce and honorable foe in the young Robb Stark. He understood that the Baratheon claimants were no fools, and so Tyrion did what he always did. He quietly prepared. He reinforced Casterly Rock's defenses, ensuring extra stockpiles of grain, arms, and treasure. He improved the fortifications around Lannisport, remembering all too well how quickly an attack could come from the sea. While Tywin led Lannister armies in the field, Tyrion guarded the home front. He had scouts along the coastal roads and pass watchmen in the mountains. If any army tried to march on Casterly Rock, Tyrion would have at least some warning. Meanwhile, he balanced the need to support Tywin's campaigns with the reality that a long, drawn-out war could bleed the Westerlands dry. He authorized measured shipments of gold and supplies, but not so much that the Westerlands would be left utterly vulnerable. More than once, he received furious letters from Tywin demanding that more resources be sent at once. Tyrion responded with cool logic, detailing in exact figures what he could spare without jeopardizing the safety of the realm's greatest fortress. Tywin's replies became briefer and more aggrieved, but eventually, perhaps grudgingly, he acquiesced. For as much as he might despise Tyrion, Tywin valued competence, and even he could not deny that Tyrion had proven his mettle more times than one. When news reached Tyrion of Ned Stark's beheading under Joffrey's orders, his heart sank. He imagined the flames of war intensifying in the north and how that rash act would galvanize the Starks and their allies like never before. Indeed, Robb Stark was proclaimed king in the north soon after, a direct threat to Lannister power. Tyrion tightened the watch on the Westerlands, increased the training of local levies, and sent out instructions to prepare for potential raids. He walked the battlements of Casterly Rock, looking out at the foaming sea, pondering the cruelty of fate. In another life, he might have been in King's Landing, might have counseled Joffrey against such an idiotic move, might have saved Ned Stark and prevented the entire North from rising in wrath. But in this life, all he could do was brace himself for the coming storms. War raged across the Seven Kingdoms. The Westerlands, for the most part, were spared the brunt of it thanks to Tywin's main forces hammering the Riverlands and then facing Robb Stark's armies. Yet Tyrion's efforts at home were not without strife. Spies infiltrated Lannisport, possibly agents of Stannis or even Baelish. Bandits who called themselves Sons of the Wolf attempted raids on supply lines. Tyrion dispatched Cerbron and a handful of reliable knights to hunt them down. One of these so-called Sons of the Wolf was captured and brought to Tyrion. He was a young man, no older than 17, spouting lines about vengeance for the North and how every Lannister deserved to die. Tyrion looked into that boy's eyes, gray and stormy, reminiscent of northern stock, and felt a pang of unexpected sympathy. He had the lad imprisoned rather than executed, giving him a chance to think about whether he wished to die for a cause he barely understood. Quietly, Tyrion began to wonder if House Lannister deserved the looming downfall many whispered about. Joffrey's sadism, Cersei's manipulations, Tywin's ruthless ambition, how long could it stand? Perhaps that was the moment Tyrion realized that, in steering the fortunes of the Westerlands, he was no longer purely loyal to the Lannister name, but rather to the people under its banner. He felt a responsibility, a calling even, to ensure that if the Lannisters ever fell, they wouldn't drag all of the innocent folk of the Westerlands down into ruin with them. The war culminated in a series of dramatic twists: Renly's death in the south, Stannis' defeat at the Blackwater, thanks in large part to Tywin's timely arrival, for which the Lion Lord took full credit, and the unexpected betrayals that led to Robb Stark's downfall at the infamous Red Wedding. As all these events unfolded, Tyrion watched from his vantage point on the rock, coordinating shipments, reading dispatches, and feeling a deep, unsettling churn in his gut. The Red Wedding was a particularly loathsome affair to him, an act of betrayal that would stain the Lannister name forever, even if it did effectively break the northern forces. He found himself dreading the next letter from Tywin. When it came, it was full of triumph. House Stark was shattered, the North was leaderless. Tywin demanded fresh gold and troops to secure their victory. Tyrion complied, but a bitterness filled his mouth as he penned the instructions to release more funds. In the immediate aftermath, House Lannister emerged more powerful than ever. Tywin named himself Hand of the King to Joffrey. The crown's debts were to be handled with Lannister gold. Alliances were forged at sore point or with lavish amounts of coin. The Tyrells joined the fold through Margaery's marriage to Joffrey. And still, Tyrion stayed behind at Casterly Rock, far from the celebrations and the illusions of grandeur that flourished in the capital. He was not present at the infamous Purple Wedding, where Joffrey choked and died. He only heard the news by Raven, a single line from Tywin: "Joffrey is dead. We have a new king." The realm lurched from one crisis to another. Tommen ascended, Myrcella was in Dorne, and Cersei's paranoia grew unchecked. Tyrion saw an opportunity in that chaos, not to take the Iron Throne for himself, for that was never his ambition, but to protect his home from the crippling aftershocks of constant war. He used the Lannister wealth at his disposal to fortify the region, focusing on infrastructural improvements that could keep the Westerlands self-sufficient even if the rest of the realm descended into madness. Some called him visionary, others called him a fool for sinking so much coin into roads, granaries, and the expansion of trade with the Reach. But Tyrion pressed on. He knew the long game. If the crown continued to war with external foes and squander its resources, the day might come when only the Westerlands would stand in a position of strength. In these years, Tyrion found an unlikely ally in Kevan Lannister, Tywin's brother. Lord Kevan was a straightforward man, lacking Tywin's cunning but not devoid of practicality. Recognizing Tyrion's aptitude, Kevan wrote letters of support. He praised the improvements to the region and even visited once, standing upon the ramparts with Tyrion. Together, they surveyed the bustling city of Lannisport, the shining harbor, the caravans moving in and out with goods. Kevan told Tyrion that Tywin had gravely underestimated him. Tyrion only smiled wryly and said that would be his father's legacy, underestimating his youngest son to the last. And so the small lion continued to grow in influence. He oversaw the drilling of new tunnels in the gold mines, ensuring each was shored up properly and not forced beyond capacity. He struck deals with blacksmiths in the Westerlands to bolster the forging of arms in a sustainable manner. He allowed shipping guilds certain tax privileges if they pledged loyalty to House Lannister's cause for the next 10 years. Piece by piece, he strengthened the region in ways that were not flashy but immensely effective over time. Trouble, however, arrived in another form. Daenerys Targaryen, said to be the last living Targaryen, began her campaign in Essos. She had dragons, the first seen in over a century. Whispers traveled across the narrow sea that she was freeing slaves, amassing an army, and might soon turn her gaze upon Westeros to reclaim the throne she believed was hers by right. Tywin, always dismissive of fables, was slow to react, but as the stories multiplied, he prepared. The question soon arose: who would guard the Westerlands should the Targaryen queen invade by sea, or if Dorne supported her cause? The burden fell, once again, to Tyrion. That was how the dwarf ended up fortifying the western coast more thoroughly than ever before. Ballista towers were erected on key headlands near Case, Fair Isle, and Lannisport. Grain reserves were stocked in preparation for a siege. Messages were exchanged with the Iron Islands, now under a tenuous peace with the crown, to keep watch for Targaryen sails. Tyrion read every scrap of information about dragons he could find in the library. He studied their strengths, their weaknesses, the histories of how Aegon's conquest had played out. He realized that if dragons truly came, wooden walls and catapults might do little to stop them. But a well-aimed scorpion bolt could bring a beast down, or so the accounts said. So Tyrion set to work with blacksmiths to develop improved scorpion designs, forging spears reinforced with steel tips. The day came when Tywin actually visited Casterly Rock in person to review the defenses. He arrived with a retinue of knights and a general sense of skepticism. Tyrion guided him through the new fortifications, the improved shipping lanes, the stockpiles. Tywin said little for the most part, but Tyrion could see the flickers of grudging respect in his father's cold green eyes. When they concluded the inspection, Tywin stood upon the rock's highest battlements overlooking the sunset sea. A wind rustled his cloak. Tyrion waited for condemnation for some scathing remark. Instead, Tywin merely stated, "You've done well here." For words. That was all. And then he turned and walked away, leaving Tyrion oddly shaken. For a moment, Tyrion had glimpsed the faintest glimmer of approval in the older man's proud face. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Not long after, tragedy struck. Tywin Lannister was found dead in the privy, no less from an apparent crossbow bolt. The realm shook. Rumors flew. Some said it was Tyrion himself who arranged it, tired of living in his father's shadow. Others said it was a plot by the Tyrells or some foreign assassin. The truth was never clearly established in the swirl of accusations. All that was known was that the mighty Tywin Lannister, the man who had orchestrated so many of the realm's victories, was gone. Cersei, grieving and enraged, sought vengeance. She wanted heads to roll. She wanted a scapegoat. The entire realm descended into a precarious balance of shifting alliances, with the crown in Tommen's name but effectively Cersei's to rule, albeit challenged by the Tyrells. Meanwhile, the threat of a Targaryen invasion loomed larger. Dorne seethed with talk of vengeance for Oberyn Martell's death. In the swirling chaos, Tyrion suddenly found that his father's position in House Lannister had fallen to him by default. Jaime was still a king guard, sworn to have no holdings. Kevan was supportive but believed the leadership should pass to Tywin's eldest legitimate male heir. That left Tyrion. And so Tyrion became Lord of Casterly Rock, not by seeking it but through the iron rule of inheritance. He received a formal letter from the crown acknowledging him as the rightful Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West. The dwarfish son that Tywin had once despised was now the official head of House Lannister. Tyrion accepted it with solemnity. He allowed himself no illusions that this was a triumph. The realm was in chaos and the Rock stood at a precarious vantage point. Yet, for the first time, the seat of true power in the Westerlands was his. The formidable fortress that had towered over him his entire life now bent to his will. He gathered his bannermen, stated plainly that no matter what transpired in King's Landing, the Westerlands would remain stable. He assured them that if Daenerys Targaryen came, they would face the threat as a united front. He offered leniency to any who doubted his leadership but made it clear that betrayal would be met with swift and certain punishment. He had learned from Tywin the value of fear, but also from his own experiences the value of measured benevolence. With these twin pillars, he bolstered House Lannister's position. In the capital, Cersei's paranoia only grew. She was rumored to have turned to darker measures, seeking alliances with alchemists, whisperers, and whoever might quench her fears. She demanded gold from Casterly Rock to pay for new follies, a revived faith militant, expansions to the Red Keep, lavish tournaments to keep the populace distracted. Tyrion, as Lord of the Rock, sent only what he deemed prudent. He refused to bankrupt his lands for her whims. This put him at odds with his sister more openly than ever before. She sent letters threatening to brand him a traitor if he did not comply. He responded with calm, logical rejections. She railed that she would have him arrested for treason. He simply pointed out that she had no authority to do so within the Westerlands and that the region's bannermen would not stand for it. Meanwhile, Daenerys Targaryen finally landed in Westeros with her dragons. The Lords of the Reach found themselves torn between loyalty to the crown and the allure of a Targaryen queen who promised dramatic changes. The Riverlands were fragmented. The Vale, under Littlefinger's sway, played its own games. The North had its king in the North once more, Jon Snow, rumored to be half Targaryen himself. The realm teetered on the brink of a new war, arguably more dangerous than anything before. Tyrion recognized that if the dragons laid waste to King's Landing, the ensuing fires would spread. Perhaps that was why he decided for once he had to leave Casterly Rock. Yet, in this alternate story, he did so not as a fugitive or a scapegoat, but as a lord traveling on official business. He left a capable castellan behind, Ser Bronn, ironically enough, to manage the day-to-day affairs. Tyrion led a delegation to open talks, not with Cersei, but with emissaries of Daenerys Targaryen who had moved to claim Dragonstone. He sought a diplomatic path. His reasoning was simple: if war inevitably came, the Westerlands would be drawn in and thousands of innocent lives would be lost. He had seen the horrors of the Greyjoy Rebellion, had orchestrated the defense against them, and he knew the devastation war could bring. Perhaps with his cunning, he could find a path that avoided total destruction, or at least ensured that House Lannister and the people under its banner survived. During his journey, Tyrion reflected on how, in another life, he might have made this crossing to King's Landing decades earlier. But everything was different now. He was no green dwarf ridiculed by the entire realm. He was Tyrion Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock. He had a lifetime of experience in governance and diplomacy behind him. He had more power than he ever expected to hold, enough to stand before dragons and not feel entirely powerless. The end of this thread of history remains uncertain. Maybe Daenerys would be swayed by his earnestness, seeing in him a kindred spirit who despised cruelty and longed for a fairer realm. Maybe she would roast him alive if she believed him false. Or perhaps events in King's Landing, Cersei's schemes, the High Sparrow's fervor, or the machinations of other lords would render Tyrion's journey moot. Yet none could deny that he had come a long way from the overshadowed boy in the Rock's libraries. The truth was, staying in Casterly Rock had shaped Tyrion into a different man, a man of quiet strength and broad vision, not wholly consumed by the conspiracies and personal vendettas that the capital nurtured like a viper pit. He had grown up with ledgers and stewards' reports, not lavish illusions of power. He understood the grit of real politics, the cost of every sword, the ripple of every gold dragon spent. He recognized that people needed peace and prosperity more than they needed the Lannisters to outshine the Targaryens or the Baratheons. And in that recognition lay his greatest advantage. He cared about more than the game. In the end, if war was unavoidable, Tyrion would fight with every ounce of cunning and resourcefulness. He would place scorpions on every battlement, fill the harbors with war galleys, muster the bannermen who respected him. But he would also offer a parley, a chance for reason. He would do everything in his power to ensure that, if the dragons soared overhead or if the armies of the north marched south, the Westerlands would not be consumed in fire and death for the vanity of a few. He believed fervently that even in Westeros, a man could strive to break the cycle of bloodshed with a well-chosen word or a carefully aimed crossbow bolt, if necessary. And perhaps that is the ultimate difference in this story. Tyrion Lannister, never leaving the Rock, discovered the foundation of his true power was not in escaping his father's shadow, but in quietly illuminating the darkness of his own realm. He had more patience, more resilience, and far greater empathy for the small folk than any other lion of House Lannister before him. He had discovered that a lord who listens is a lord who is trusted, a lord who can navigate storms of rebellion, invasion, and cataclysm. In some ways, he was still lonely. Still short in stature, still battling the prejudices of those who saw only his outward form. But he had found a measure of respect, even admiration, that few could have foreseen. When he rode through the courtyard of Casterly Rock, guards saluted him with genuine esteem. When he visited Lannisport, people greeted him with cautious smiles, some even calling him Lord Tyrion rather than the Imp. Where once he walked in shadows, now he strolled in the open, wearing a cloak embroidered with the golden lion, unashamed of W. Ho he was. He did not delude himself that the future would be easy. Westeros was a land of ceaseless conflict, where winter always threatened to return, where houses rose and fell in the blink of an eye. But Tyrion had proven, time and again, that he could thrive where others expected him to fail. He had learned the lessons of cunning from his father while forging his own path of tempered compassion. He had turned Casterly Rock from a mere fortress into a beacon of stability, at least within the tumultuous seas of the realm's politics. And so we leave him, standing on the deck of a sleek Lannisport ship as it sails toward Dragonstone, or possibly riding across the Westerlands toward a meeting with envoys from the north. Perhaps he is even still within the halls of Casterly Rock, poring over maps by lamplight, strategizing how to handle the next wave of chaos from King's Landing. Whichever path he takes, this Tyrion knows he faces dragons, armies, and the cunning of his sister. He knows every step might be his last. But if he must fall, he will do so as a man who earned his own worth, not by birthright, but through wits, hard work, and a belief in something beyond the vanity of a single house. For in this tale, Tyrion Lannister never left Casterly Rock, yet became its true master. And the rock itself, long unyielding as stone, softened a bit beneath the careful hand of the dwarf who gave his life to see it prosper. Free from the corrosive intrigues of King's Landing, Tyrion shaped the destiny of the Westerlands, forging alliances and charting a course that might just save the realm from the fires of dragons and the ambitions of men. Maybe he would not succeed in the end, for the tides of history can be fierce. But few would deny that, were he given the chance, Tyrion would stand upon the ramparts of Casterly Rock, stare down the swirling storms, and hold his ground with a quiet, unbreakable resolve, a lion in truth, if not in height. With a mind as vast as the libraries he grew up in and a heart unexpectedly large for a Lannister. And that, above all else, would be his lasting legacy, the small man who ruled a great fortress, the outcast who became a pillar of stability, and the thoughtful lord who recognized that, sometimes, the greatest power is wielded not by those who play the game most viciously, but by those who understand that duty to the people under their care is what truly endures. If the histories of Westeros are ever fair, they would chronicle Tyrion's rule at Casterly Rock as a golden era of prosperity amid a realm torn by war, proof that even an imp could guide a kingdom toward the flicker of hope in the midst of encroaching darkness. Below is a continued narrative extending and deepening the alternate history of Tyrion Lannister, carrying forward from the point where he stands as Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West. What follows weaves together the aftermath of his decision to leave the Rock on official business, the tremors caused by Daenerys Targaryen's invasion, and the subtle games Tyrion must play to safeguard House Lannister, indeed the entire Westerlands, from a new age of dragons and turmoil. In this telling, the imp steps fully into his mantle as a master of cunning and empathy. The words are crafted as though by a skilled novelist, focusing on Tyrion's interior struggles and outward maneuvers, ever mindful of the precarious balance between his own survival and the fate of the kingdom. He had not traveled far from Casterly Rock in years, decades really, when he set out with a modest entourage along the coastal road to the nearest port that would ferry him across to Dragonstone. That first night on the road, he lay awake under the roof of a wealthy merchant's home, listening to the quiet hush of the ocean. Memories rose like phantoms in his mind, the sea-lashed cliffs of the Rock, the study rooms where he pored over books by candlelight, the occasional mocking smiles he endured for being an imp, yet now those recollections felt distant, replaced by a sense of purpose. In the dim lamplight of the merchant's guest chamber, Tyrion wrote out his thoughts by hand, summarizing his strategy should Daenerys Targaryen prove receptive or hostile. He was no fool, dragons changed the balance of everything. Even with ballista towers, scorpion bolts, and cunning, the Westerlands might be at grave risk if the Targaryen queen sought vengeance on House Lannister for all the old sins that still stained his family name. Rebellion against the Targaryens, the Red Wedding, the countless slights Tywin had wrought, such a ledger of wrongs might appear insurmountable. Tyrion's mind sorted through each debt, trying to see how best to soften Daenerys' wrath if indeed she possessed a sense of mercy beneath her fire and blood. In days, he reached the port of Case, where a swift Lannisport galley awaited him. Men recognized him as he made his way aboard, some stepping aside with bowing heads, others gawking with uncertain curiosity. Few dwarfs walked the decks of war galleys, fewer still were the recognized lords of the Westerlands. Tyrion ascended the gangplank, cane tapping the wooden slats. Once settled in the captain's cabin, he gave instructions to weigh anchor, then stared through a porthole at the receding coastline. A twinge of longing ran through him. It was the first time in his life that Casterly Rock truly felt far behind, though he carried its legacy, its weight, within him. They sailed the Sunset Sea eastward, rounding the southern edge of Westeros. The journey was not short, and Tyrion used every hour to plan. He devoured accounts written about Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters. He studied the genealogical records of House Targaryen, gleaning what he could of their customs and passions. Late at night, after sipping a bit too much strong wine, he caught himself imagining how those dragons might look gliding across a twilight sky. If rumor were to be believed, Daenerys had 3. He pondered how anyone could possibly negotiate with a power so raw, so overwhelming. Even Tywin, at the height of his cunning, had never faced living dragons. Yet Tyrion remembered from the histories that dragons were not invincible. They required flight and flame, they needed to feed, and they answered, in theory, to the will of a Targaryen who held their loyalty. After long days on open waters, the Lannisport galley at last spotted Dragonstone, its jagged towers carved in the ancient Valyrian style, perched on volcanic rock above surging waves. Tyrion stood at the prow, cloak snapping in the salt wind, and marveled. Even from a distance, he felt the presence of something old and formidable, as though the stones themselves whispered of powers older than the 7 kingdoms. The castle's silhouette seemed watchful, each tower sculpted to resemble dragons perched in eternal vigil. A swirl of sea mist clung to the fortress's lower ramparts. A handful of smaller boats, sails black in the gloom, approached the Lannister galley. Men bearing the sigil of House Targaryen, a 3-headed dragon of red on a black field, called out in voices loud and sharp. Tyrion ordered the men of his entourage to sheath their weapons and stand down. This was no time for bravado. In a calm, clear voice, he announced himself Tyrion of House Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West, come to speak with the Dragon Queen at her invitation, or so I hope. He doubted that Daenerys Targaryen had specifically invited him, but he knew enough of courtesy that if she turned him away, it would be as an affront to all the Westerlands. The Targaryen men conferred in low tones before granting permission to approach the docks under heavy guard. As Tyrion disembarked, he saw unsmiling faces and more than one gaze flicker with disdain at his small stature. Yet no one voiced insults. This was not King's Landing, where courtiers mocked him openly. These were soldiers and servants of the Dragon Queen, disciplined and alert. The hush in the air seemed thick with tension. Tyrion noted the presence of Unsullied, the famed eunuch warriors of Essos. Their stoicism and perfect formation unnerved him more than any jibe about his height. He realized how far Daenerys' power extended. She wielded not just dragons, but also an army from across the sea. A knight in dark armor bearing a sigil Tyrion did not recognize stepped forward. "We will escort you to her grace," the knight said. "Lay down any blades at the threshold. Any signs of treachery and your delegation shall be slaughtered to the last man." Tyrion responded with an amiable smile. "No treachery from me, I assure you. As you can see, my sword is more ornament than threat." He gestured to the short blade at his hip. One of his men, Ser Bron's chosen deputy, glowered but complied when Tyrion signaled. They followed the knight and the Unsullied up a steep walkway of black stone, passing under archways carved with monstrous dragon heads. Steaming vents in the rock exhaled sulfurous fumes. The higher they climbed, the stronger the sea wind, ruffling Tyrion's curls and reminding him in some distant way of the breezes around Casterly Rock. But while Casterly Rock's air smelled of salt and faint gold dust, here it reeked of brimstone. They arrived in a large courtyard where torches flickered against basalt walls. Tyrion had expected to see dragons perched upon battlements, but no beasts materialized. Instead, he glimpsed a pale-haired woman standing near a brazier, engaged in conversation with a warrior who might have been a Dothraki by his attire. She wore a gown of black and red, the Targaryen colors, and even from a distance, Tyrion sensed an aura of quiet authority about her. Daenerys Targaryen. The Dragon Queen turned, caught sight of Tyrion, and paused. Her violet eyes flickered with curiosity. A slight tension pulled at Tyrion's gut. He was about to speak to a woman rumored to wield fire and blood as her birthright, who had conquered cities in Essos and freed thousands of slaves. He took a moment to gather himself, recalling that he was Lord of Casterly Rock, not a supplicant. He advanced as far as her guards would permit, then inclined his head. "Your Grace, I come in peace on behalf of the Westerlands to seek common ground amid these troubled times." Daenerys studied him. Her gaze did not linger upon his dwarfism as so many others did. She spoke in a measured, regal tone, "Tyrion Lannister, I have heard tales of your cunning. They say you have governed the Westerlands with more fairness than any Lannister lord in living memory. And yet you bear the name Lannister, the same name that overthrew my family." Tyrion noted the presence of advisors at her side, a spymaster or two, possibly envoys from other courts. One man with a shaved head and watchful eyes studied Tyrion intently. Another figure, a woman garbed in a style reminiscent of Nath, lingered behind them, her expression inscrutable. Tyrion recognized the complexities. Daenerys Targaryen's court was no less layered than the one in King's Landing. "I understand your reservations," Tyrion replied. "Yet I would point out that I was but a boy, if that, during the downfall of House Targaryen. My father, Tywin Lannister, orchestrated much that I did not approve of. He is gone now, and I have dedicated my life to governing the Westerlands in a manner that might bring prosperity, not bloodshed." He allowed a small pause. "You have been named the Breaker of Chains, the Mother of Dragons. I have no chains in my land, but I do have people who long for peace. My father's alliances in the capital do not necessarily represent my own aims." He sensed a stir among her retinue. Even Daenerys herself seemed momentarily piqued by his statement. Tyrion ventured a small bow of respect, then continued, "If we can find a path that does not involve turning the Seven Kingdoms into a charnel house, I stand ready to negotiate. Let me be clear. I do not speak for King Tommen or Queen Cersei. I speak for the Westerlands that I govern, a realm that has no desire to watch dragons burn its fields." Daenerys regarded him for a heartbeat longer. "Very well, Lord Tyrion. You shall have the hospitality of Dragonstone. We will speak further in my hall." Her voice carried a quiet resolve. She turned, leading the way through a set of tall doors carved with intricate dragon motifs. Tyrion's men followed, flanked by Unsullied. They entered a cavernous hall lit by braziers and a few thin shafts of daylight spilling through narrow windows. The walls were etched with ancient Valyrian glyphs, and an enormous table shaped like Westeros itself stood at the center, the famed painted table of Aegon the Conqueror. Tyrion found himself marveling at the craftsmanship. Daenerys gestured for him to stand on one side while she took her position at the head of the table. Her advisors fanned out around her, each watchful in their own way. A quiet tension reigned until Daenerys spoke. "You claim you come as a representative of the Westerlands, distinct from the crown. This is most unusual, for are not the Westerlands sworn to the Iron Throne?" Tyrion steeled himself. "We are sworn to protect the crown, yes, but I would suggest that the crown has lately proved volatile. King Joffrey, King Tommen, Queen Cersei, each in turn has demanded gold and men to wage needless wars. The realm bleeds for their ambitions. My father fueled their greed, but I would not see the Westerlands destroyed for it. We are too proud to remain a vassal to chaos. I propose a conditional truce with you, your grace. If you intend to bring a new order to Westeros, if you truly wish to free people from tyranny, then let us be your allies under certain terms." Someone among her advisors scoffed, a tall man with a braided mustache and dark skin. "Allies? After your father betrayed the Targaryens." Tyrion expected such barbs. "My father died on a privy, as you may have heard, under circumstances still mysterious. As to betrayal, my father, Tywin Lannister, served the Mad King long before he ever cast him aside. I do not stand here to excuse or repeat his actions. House Lannister has its sins. But must the children pay for every crime of their fathers? If so, the cycle of vengeance will never end." Daenerys's violet eyes flickered with intensity. She seemed to weigh his words. "You speak of cycles of bloodshed. I have seen such cycles break cities and enslave entire peoples. I have freed many from them. I would free Westeros as well, but Westeros has not always welcomed my ancestors with open arms." Tyrion said, "Nonetheless, it was your ancestor who united the 7 kingdoms with dragons and sword. Change often comes through force, I will not deny. But if it can also come through reason, fewer lives are lost. I suspect you know the value of tempering fire with diplomacy, or else you would not have left so many freed slaves to govern themselves, nor sought alliances with the likes of House Martell and the Tyrells." Daenerys regarded the painted table. "You presume to know much of my affairs." Tyrion shrugged lightly. "I read, I listen, I watch. Knowledge is my trade. I only suggest that if you plan to depose Cersei and Tommen, you will face steep resistance. The gold mines, the standing armies, most still remain under the Lannister name." He pressed a gloved hand to his chest. "Under my name." A hush fell. Tyrion sensed he had reached the crucial pivot in negotiations. To show fear would embolden them to treat him as a hostage. To show arrogance would provoke a dragonfire response. He needed to be measured. Daenerys stepped away from the table, pacing across the basalt floor. "You propose that the Westerlands become, what? An ally of House Targaryen, separate from the crown until such time as I seize the Iron Throne." Tyrion allowed a small, careful smile. "I propose we end the notion of an Iron Throne as it has been, a seat that incites madness and greed. If you truly wish to rule, if you are the rightful queen, then you need stability in each region. You need a warden of the West who can maintain peace without spilling unnecessary blood. My father taught me that power is where people believe it resides. If you come to the Westerlands as a conqueror, the people will fight to the death. But if you come as a liberator with the backing of the region's own lord, they might accept you without lighting the beacons of war." Her advisors bristled at the suggestion of half-measures. Daenerys raised a hand to silence them. "And if I refuse this arrangement? If I choose to march my armies, to unleash my dragons upon Casterly Rock and your precious Lannisport? Could you stop me?" Tyrion exhaled calmly. "Not stop you entirely, but we could harry your advance, strike at your supply lines, lay traps for your armies. If you burn our fields, you gain only ash. And even dragons cannot be everywhere at once. It would be a costly victory and one that would breed new rebellions each generation." He paused, letting the weight of history speak for itself. "I might die in the process. Many would, but is that the best way to win hearts and minds?" Daenerys' eyes narrowed. "You speak boldly. It seems you do not fear me." He bowed just enough to show respect. "On the contrary, I fear you very much as any sensible man would fear a queen with dragons. Yet I refuse to let fear rule me. If I did, I would be no better than those who scurry in the shadows of King's Landing." For a long moment, no one spoke. Tyrion felt sweat bead at his temple, despite the drafty chill of Dragonstone. Then Daenerys signaled to a guard. "Show Lord Tyrion and his men to suitable quarters. Let them rest, be fed. We shall speak more when I have consulted my advisors." Tyrion bowed once again. "I thank you, your grace." He let out a subtle breath of relief as he followed the Unsullied out of the hall. The first step had been taken. He had not been roasted alive or thrown into chains. Yet Daenerys Targaryen had not offered an alliance, nor had she cast him out. The real negotiation lay ahead. Days passed in an uneasy stalemate. Tyrion's men were treated with formal courtesy, provided with meals of fish stew, dark bread, and watered wine. The corridors of Dragonstone echoed with the footsteps of foreign warriors. Occasionally, Tyrion glimpsed one of the dragons wheeling overhead, a massive shape in the sky, leathery wings outspread, the sunlight glinting off scales of green or black. He found himself stepping onto a balcony one day to watch a dragon descend upon a far courtyard, releasing a roar that made the very stones vibrate. Each time, he marveled at how unstoppable they seemed. But unstoppable was not unconquerable. He kept that distinction firmly in mind. At last, one morning, an unsmiling advisor beckoned Tyrion to the painted table once more. This time, Daenerys stood with a new figure at her side. A tall man with hair the color of ash blonde, dressed in subdued armor. Ser Jorah Mormont, Tyrion suspected, from the sigil of the bear on his cloak. The man's watchful gaze suggested he was protective of his queen. Still, Daenerys greeted Tyrion with a measured nod. "Lord Tyrion, my advisors and I have considered your proposal. Some think we should take what we want by fire. Others think we should at least entertain your perspective. I would hear your terms in detail." Tyrion noted the tension in the air. He spoke carefully. "A wise decision, your grace. The Westerlands will provide grain and gold to your cause, but we ask for certain assurances. First, that Casterly Rock and the local lords be allowed to govern their lands without the imposition of brutal occupation. Second, that if you do take the Iron Throne, you will not raise King's Landing in flames. Our trade routes and shipping lanes are intertwined with the capital. A scorched city benefits no one. Third, that you will recognize me officially as Warden of the West, ensuring my authority is upheld rather than subverted by whichever council you install in the Red Keep." He glanced at Daenerys' retinue. Some eyes hardened. He continued, "In return, I can ensure a smooth transition of power in the Westerlands, preventing the region from rallying to Cersei out of misguided loyalty. I can also influence certain bannermen who hold the capital's purse strings. And I will personally vow never to conspire against you. I desire stability, not petty sabotage." One of Daenerys' advisors, a wiry man with cunning eyes, perhaps a sellsword from Essos, snorted. "You claim you can just turn your bannermen away from Cersei? That is easier said than done." Tyrion inclined his head. "I do not claim to wave a magic wand, but I have spent years building trust. I do not rely solely on fear to keep my bannermen in line, though fear plays a part. I rely on the mutual benefit we share. Most lords prefer stability over chaos. Present them with a future where the Targaryen queen rules fairly and they will adapt. Threaten them with dragonfire and they will cling to the old ways, desperate to avoid total annihilation." Daenerys placed her hands on the painted table, gazing at the carved coastline of Westeros. "Many have promised me loyalty over the years. Some were sincere, others deceitful. Why should I trust you?" Tyrion offered a wry half-smile. "Trust is earned, not demanded. What I offer is a first step. You want to end the Lannister hold on the throne, correct? I can help you do so, and in exchange, you allow the West to stand as a loyal region under your rule without being punished for Tywin's crimes or Cersei's follies. If we succeed, you gain a realm that does not view you as a foreign invader. If we fail, well, you will have lost little by hearing me out." Ser Jorah Mormont's deep voice intervened. "And what is to stop your sister from sending an army to retake the Westerlands while you linger here?" Tyrion shrugged. "Even Cersei cannot fight everyone at once. She has the Tyrells at her throat, the Martells simmering with vengeance, the North in open revolt under Jon Snow, and now the threat of dragons at her doorstep. She cannot afford to march west in force, not without leaving King's Landing vulnerable. And I have prepared the Rock to be well defended in any case." Daenerys tapped her fingers on the table. You speak as if you were already separate from the crown. Is that your ultimate goal, to carve out a separate kingdom? Tyrion shook his head. No. The Westerlands remain part of the Seven Kingdoms, but we must be governed by a ruler who does not see us solely as a treasury to be milked or a scapegoat for all the realm's ills. With King Robert and then Joffrey, we paid the debts, financed the wars, and received scorn and blame in return. If you become queen, treat us as partners, not pawns. If I find you keep your word, I will prove a loyal vassal. If you break it, well, I suspect you would have bigger problems than me. He could hear the slightest trembling hush in the hall. Daenerys seemed to weigh him anew. Then, in a decisive motion, she placed a hand on the section of the table representing the Westerlands. Very well. I will accept your terms for now. Prove your sincerity. Help me bring the other lords to heel without a bloodbath if it can be managed. And ensure the gold of Casterly rock flows to my cause so I might feed and supply my armies. If you do all this, you and your people shall have my protection and my favor. Tyrion let himself breathe a fraction more easily. A wise arrangement, your grace. He glanced around. Shall we seal it with some formal sign? A handshake, a vow before the seven, or before the old gods and the new? Daenerys' face remained serious. We shall sign a written pact, which my scribes will draft. And you shall take an oath as your banner men do, promising loyalty to the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Is that acceptable, Lord Tyrion? He gave a slight bow. Entirely. Thus began an uneasy alliance between the House Targaryen claimant and the newly ascendant Lord of the Westerlands. Over the next days, Tyrion collaborated with Daenerys' scribes to craft the precise language of their accord. He employed every ounce of his diplomatic skill, bridging the differences in style and tradition that separated them. While at Dragonstone, he learned more of her companions, Missandei of Noth, who possessed a brilliance for languages and a calm presence that belied her youth, Grey Worm, the unsullied commander whose loyalty to Daenerys was absolute, and Ser Davos Seaworth, who arrived one day representing the king in the North's cause. That was a revelation. Apparently Daenerys and Jon Snow had begun negotiations of their own. Each day, the web of alliances grew more complex. Tyrion also gathered subtle intelligence. He learned that Daenerys' dragons were still growing, that they were not fully invincible. He took note of her partial reliance on the Dothraki horde, a ferocious cavalry that might wreak havoc on the battlefields of Westeros. He filed all these details away in his mind, not necessarily to use against her, but because knowledge was power. Should negotiations sour, he needed every advantage he could muster. Yet, the more he observed Daenerys, the more he realized that she was not the tyrant his father or sister would have painted her as. She was at times merciful, at times unyielding. A blend of compassion and severity. Perhaps, Tyrion mused, that was the exact formula needed for a queen of a realm as fractured as Westeros. At length, the day came when he and his delegation were granted leave to return to the Westerlands, bearing official letters from Daenerys. Their next step was to lay the groundwork for the Targaryen approach, a call for lords to either stand down from supporting the crown or face the unstoppable might of dragons. As Tyrion boarded his galley once more, Daenerys herself appeared at the dock. She approached Tyrion in a swirl of black and red silk, her silver hair catching the morning light. Lord Tyrion, she said, I do not know if this gamble will pay off, but I respect your determination. I hope for the sake of your people and mine you will not disappoint me. Tyrion offered a cordial bow. I too hope that war can be minimized, your grace. May fortune favor us in forging a better realm. He considered adding a flourish, but Daenerys turned aside before he could. She joined Ser Jorah Mormont on a cliffside vantage to watch the Lannister ship depart, a queen in silhouette against the towering fortress of Dragonstone. The return voyage was swift, aided by fair winds. Tyrion stood on the deck, scanning the horizon, his mind abuzz with plans. He would have to convene his bannermen quickly. Some might object to an accord with a Targaryen queen. He would have to reassure them that House Lannister was not bending the knee like beaten curs, but rather making a strategic decision to preserve their lands. The line would be thin, but Tyrion trusted his tongue to carry the argument. He also knew that Cersei would respond with rage once the news reached her. In her eyes, his pact would be tantamount to betrayal. Another piece of his father's legacy undone. Upon landing back in Case, Tyrion immediately dispatched riders to call for a gathering of lords at Casterly Rock. He himself rode under guard along the winding roads that hugged the coastline, seeing firsthand the improvements he had instituted over the years, better paving, toll booths that funded local repairs, watchtowers for security. Small folk greeted him with guarded respect. Some recognized his black and gold surcoat, marking him as their lord. Others simply stared, curious at the sight of the dwarf with a proud posture astride a sturdy chestnut horse. When Tyrion reached the rock, Ser Bronn greeted him in the main courtyard, a lazy grin on his face. "Welcome home, my lord. Everything's in one piece, though I've had to break up a few squabbles among lesser knights who think they deserve bigger slices of the gold." Tyrion dismounted, patting dust from his travel-stained cloak. "You've done well, Bronn. Send word that I'll meet the lords in the Great Hall by sundown tomorrow." Bronn nodded, his tone light. "They'll wonder what new madness you've brought from across the sea." Tyrion snorted softly. "Madness is precisely what I hope to avert." That night, alone in the Lord's solar that once belonged to Tywin, Tyrion reviewed the parchment bearing Daenerys' seal. He recognized it as more than a mere letter. It was a symbol of monumental change. If the Westerlands officially supported her claim, the entire balance of power in Westeros could shift in a heartbeat. Cersei would be isolated, reliant on mercenaries and what little loyalty remained among the crown's supporters. The North was already estranged, the Riverlands battered by war, Dorne quietly raging, the Reach in flux after the recent betrayals. Tyrell or Targaryen might claim loyalty from those corners. Tyrion sank into a high-backed chair, letting the flicker of candlelight cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. He thought about how far he had come, once a scorned dwarf in his father's fortress, now the de facto ruler of the West, deciding whether to stand by the Iron Throne or cast it aside. The weight of that choice settled heavy upon him. He drained a cup of wine, telling himself that he had chosen the lesser evil. Fire and blood were on the horizon, but at least he might spare the Westerlands from total ruin. The next day, lords assembled in the Great Hall. House Crakehall, House Marbrand, House Swift, House Kenning, and more. Banners with their sigils fluttered in the torchlight. They ranged from cautious to openly curious. Tyrion arrived dressed in the Lannister colors of crimson and gold, though subtlety tempered his attire, no need for gaudy displays. He took a seat at the dais, flanked by a small retinue of loyal knights and stewards, with Ser Bronn standing to one side like a bored sentinel. A herald announced, "Lords of the Westerlands, Lord Tyrion of House Lannister, Warden of the West, addresses you." The hall fell silent. Tyrion's voice resonated, clear and calm. "My friends and bannermen, I have returned from talks with Daenerys Targaryen, who brings dragons once again to our shores. She makes a claim upon the Iron Throne. As you know, King Tommen sits that throne, but in truth, Queen Cersei wields its power. And how has that power served us? Do we see peace, prosperity, or do we see unending war?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some frowned, wary of criticizing the crown. Tyrion continued, "We have financed the crown's debts, armed its knights, and yet the realm is in chaos. The Tyrells, once our allies, are estranged. The Martells brood in Dorne. The North is in rebellion. The Riverlands are gutted. House Lannister stands at the center of a storm, and our enemies circle like wolves. The Targaryen queen could descend on us with dragon fire, and even the mightiest fortress cannot wholly withstand that fury. So I have proposed a different path, alliance." A palpable shock ran through the hall. Lord Crakehall stepped forward, face ruddy with tension. "An alliance with the Targaryen pretender? That's treason against the crown." Tyrion fixed the lord with a steady gaze. "Is it treason to protect our lands from certain destruction? We have every right to determine our own destiny when the crown has brought us to the brink of ruin. Daenerys Targaryen offers terms. She will not sack the Westerlands, and she will confirm me as your warden. In return, we provide her with gold and resources to further her cause of uniting the realm under a new order." A younger lord piped up. "But can she be trusted? She's a foreigner, with dragons and armies from Essos." Tyrion spread his hands. "A fair question. Trust is earned. Yet ask yourselves, do you trust Cersei more? Our region has been paying the Iron Throne's debts for years. Did King Robert or King Joffrey treat us with honor? Or did they bleed us dry? My father, for all his cunning, entangled us in alliances that led to abominations like the Red Wedding. Do we truly wish to follow that path of betrayal and cruelty forever?" Ser Bronn added in a dry tone, "Personally, I'd rather avoid being roasted alive when those dragons arrive." A rumble of uneasy laughter passed through a few lords. Tyrion pressed the advantage. "We stand on a precipice. The old ways, where the Lannisters propped up the crown, have led to endless war. Daenerys Targaryen seeks to break that cycle. She has freed slaves across the narrow sea, ended tyrants. Yes, she is capable of violence, but so is every ruler who has ever sat on a throne in Westeros. The difference is, She does not wish to see the innocent burned. She believes in forging a better future. I believe we can shape that future to our benefit, instead of cowering behind walls until Dragonfire tears them down. Lord Marbrand, an older man known for a balanced view, spoke up thoughtfully. What of the North, Lord Tyrion? They follow a king in the North, some say. Where does that leave us if the realm fractures further? Tyrion nodded. The Targaryen queen is also in talks with the North. She seeks a broad alliance. I will not claim to speak for Jon Snow, but I hear he cares for the welfare of his people above all. If Daenerys can unite the North and the Southern kingdoms under a single banner, would that not benefit us? Fewer border skirmishes, more stable trade routes. We stand to gain much if we join early, like the first man to invest in a promising venture, reaping the largest share of rewards. A hush lingered. Then Lord Craighall, still uneasy, asked, "And if we refuse? If we stand by the rightful king?" Tyrion's voice turned steely. "Then you face the might of House Targaryen, dragons, unsullied, Dothraki, and the fury of any other houses that join her. Will Cersei's promise of support outweigh that threat? Do you trust she will not discard you the moment it benefits her? She is my sister, but I know her better than any of you. She would burn every field in the Westerlands to maintain her grip on the throne." Grumbling erupted here and there. Several lords began whispering among themselves. Tyrion observed them keenly, reading the currents of dissent or acquiescence. At last he raised a hand, quieting them. "I do not force your hand. I merely tell you the truth. Daenerys Targaryen will march. We can meet her as enemies or as friends. As your lord, I advise the latter." In the silence that followed, Tyrion saw fear, doubt, a tinge of hope. Then one by one, lords began nodding. Some more enthusiastic, some resigned. Most recognized that fighting dragons was a fool's errand, especially when their own wealth and blood were on the line. A few might have reservations, but the tide was clear. Ultimately, Tyrion had built enough goodwill over the years that they were willing to follow him, trusting his judgment more than they feared the uncertain future. That night, an accord was signed among the leading houses of the Westerlands, formally pledging conditional support to Daenerys Targaryen if certain terms were met. Tyrion dispatched ravens to Dragonstone, bearing the good news. He also sent letters to King's Landing, addressed to Cersei, informing her of the Westerlands' neutrality in the conflict, not quite declaring open rebellion but no longer promising troops or gold. It was an unmistakable break. Word came swiftly back from King's Landing, furious, raving letters from Cersei demanding Tyrion's head, threatening to strip him of title and land, cursing him as a traitor. She raved about the monstrous injustice he was doing to their family name. Tyrion read these letters in the flickering lamplight of Tywin's old solar, taking no pleasure in the rift. But he knew there was no turning back. If Cersei insisted on fighting a war she could not win, the best he could do was spare the Westerlands the brunt of the carnage. In time, as Daenerys advanced with her armies, news of her victories spread. She took castles in the Crownlands with minimal bloodshed, gave local lords the chance to bend the knee. Many who resisted were overwhelmed by Dothraki riders and Dragonfire. Meanwhile, Tyrion oversaw the shipments of gold from Casterly Rock to her forces, quietly enabling her supply lines. He negotiated with the Tyrells, who disliked the Lannisters but hated Cersei more. Gradually, the lines of conflict shaped up, Targaryen in the ascendant, Baratheon Lannister in retreat. Even the Iron Islands had partially rallied to Daenerys under Yara Greyjoy, leaving Euron Greyjoy to strike deals with Cersei in a last, desperate bid. When Daenerys finally marched on King's Landing, Tyrion accompanied her, though he did so carefully. He donned armor for the first time in years, a light leather cuirass with the Lannister lion discreetly replaced by a new sigil that featured a golden lion entwined with a Targaryen dragon, the symbol of their alliance. He did not ride at the head of the column, for that was Daenerys' place, flanked by Dothraki outriders, her unsullied legions behind. Tyrion stayed in a supply wagon near the front, his eyes scanning the horizon as the spires of the Red Keep emerged under a haze of morning sunlight. Smoke clung to the city's outskirts, and he recalled other tales of sacking and sieges. He steeled himself, hoping this would not become another atrocity like the ones that had so often stained House Lannister's history. Outside the walls, a standoff ensued. Cersei refused to yield, her gold cloaks manning the battlements. 4 hours, Daenerys' forces encircled the city. Tyrion watched from a vantage point as one of the dragons, Drogon, he assumed, circled overhead, roaring a challenge that echoed through the air. The defenders on the walls quivered, clearly terrified. Yet Cersei's pride would not let her relent. Tyrion volunteered to make one final attempt at negotiation. Daenerys was reluctant to risk him, but he persuaded her that it might avert a massacre. The dwarf rode up to the city gates, alone, carrying a banner of truce. Archers lined the walls, arrows knocked. After a tense interval, the gates parted and a small party emerged, Ser Gregor Clegane among them, hulking and monstrous in his black helm. Tyrion dismounted, approaching on foot. Ser Gregor towered over him, silent. Beside him stood Qyburn, the eerie former maester who now served as Cersei's confidant. Qyburn spoke, voice cold as ice. "You have come to parley, Lord Tyrion? The Queen has little interest in your treasonous babble. You should flee before she has you executed." Tyrion's breath caught in his throat, but he refused to be cowed. "Cersei is hopelessly outnumbered. This city need not burn. Surrender the crown, let the realm pass peacefully to Daenerys Targaryen, and the people of King's Landing may be spared." Qyburn's lip curled. The Queen does not yield to usurpers. Nor does she forgive betrayal. Tyrion raised his voice so that the gold cloaks on the battlements might hear. "Does she not care for your lives, good men? Daenerys has 3 dragons. You cannot stop them all. If you fight, you die. If you open these gates, you live. Ask yourselves, what loyalty do you owe a queen who would sooner see you burn than relinquish her seat?" He could sense the tremors of fear passing through the ranks. The mountain said nothing, but his menacing presence spoke volumes. Qyburn hissed, "You speak treason. Begone, imp, lest we strike you down now." Tyrion gave a half-laugh, half-sigh. "As you will, Qyburn. But remember, if this city burns, its ashes will stain your conscience. Mine is stained enough already." With that, he turned and walked away, aware that an arrow or a sword stroke could end him at any instant. Yet no arrow came. He remounted and rode back to Daenerys' lines, concluding grimly that diplomacy had failed. That evening, Daenerys unleashed one of her dragons upon a small, uninhabited stretch of the city wall, toppling it in an explosion of flame and molten stone. The gold cloaks there fled in terror. Realizing how hopeless the defense was, large segments of the city guard began to lay down arms. Tyrion urged Daenerys to press the advantage quickly but to avoid wholesale slaughter. She listened, ordering her forces to capture the gates and subdue pockets of resistance. Those who surrendered were spared. Only the most fanatic or those commanded by the mountain fought to the bitter end. Cersei herself, rumor said, retreated to the Red Keep with a handful of loyal guards and Qyburn at her side. When the fighting in the city streets died down, Daenerys gave Tyrion leave to ascend the keep and attempt one final negotiation. He found his sister on the throne in the massive throne room. She sat in regal defiance, wearing black mourning clothes that emphasized her pale features. The great hall was eerily quiet. No courtiers, only a few guards and the hulking shape of Ser Gregor. Tyrion approached, each step echoing. "Cersei," he said softly, "it's over. The city's walls are breached. The gold cloaks have surrendered. Daenerys controls most of King's Landing. Surrender, or thousands more might die if you continue this charade." Cersei's eyes blazed with hatred. "Traitor, you turned our house against me." Tyrion swallowed. "I saved our house. Father's legacy was unsustainable. War after war, debt after debt. I bargained with Daenerys for a peaceful transition. Your refusal has cost more lives than we can count." She rose from the throne, fists clenched. "You think you've won? This city is a viper's nest. Even if she sits on the throne, she'll never truly be queen. She's a foreign whore with scaly beasts." He stepped closer, ignoring the hiss of Ser Gregor. "Call me what you like, but your subjects are done dying for your pride. Step down for Tommen's sake, for Myrcella's. Don't let their memory be tarnished by more cruelty." For an instant, raw grief flickered over Cersei's face. Then she forced it away. "You're a fool, Tyrion. Always have been." She raised a hand, a signal. Ser Gregor loomed forward. Tyrion clenched his jaw, bracing for the worst. But in that moment, the doors behind him burst open. Unsullied warriors flooded in. Ser Gregor pivoted, roaring under his helmet. Steel clashed. In a heartbeat, the monstrous knight had cut down 3 unsullied, but they swarmed him, stabbing relentlessly, each blow chipping away at his armor. Qyburn tried to intervene and was slashed down. Cersei screamed. Tyrion turned away from the carnage, hearing the inhuman growls of Ser Gregor. In the end, the mountain fell beneath a hail of spears. Silence returned. Cersei stood, trembling, near the dais. Tyrion approached with cautious steps. "It's done. No more blood, please." She glared, tears in her eyes, then spat in his face. "I will never bow to that Targaryen bitch." She grabbed a fallen guard's dagger and lunged. Tyrion jerked back, and the Unsullied closed ranks, disarming her with grim efficiency. Cersei collapsed to her knees, sobbing in rage and despair. For all her cunning, for all her bitterness, she was only human in that moment, defeated, alone, her illusions of power ripped away. Daenerys entered, flanked by Grey Worm, her face stern. She looked upon Cersei as if assessing a rabid dog. For a charged second, Tyrion feared she would order an execution on the spot. But then Daenerys said quietly, "Take her to the dungeons. She will stand trial for her crimes against the realm." Thus ended the reign of House Lannister over the Iron Throne. The war concluded more swiftly than many had predicted, largely thanks to Tyrion's efforts in neutralizing the Westerland's potential resistance. King's Landing bore scars of dragonfire, but the city stood largely intact, spared from the wholesale devastation that might have occurred if dragons had been unleashed in full fury. People warily emerged from their homes, uncertain whether this new queen would prove better or worse than the last. Daenerys, advised by Tyrion, enacted measures to restore order, distributing food stocks that Tyrion's men brought from the west. She promised a new era. Whether the promise would be kept remained to be seen. In the days that followed, a makeshift coronation was prepared. Daenerys Targaryen ascended to the throne, recognized by many of the great houses, though pockets of dissent remained. Tyrion stood among her advisors as an acknowledged force, the Lord of Casterly Rock who had brokered peace. He refused any formal seat on her small council, preferring to remain in the Westerlands to oversee reconstruction. But whenever Daenerys required counsel on finances, negotiation, or the delicate management of lesser lords, she turned to him. When it came time for Cersei's trial, Tyrion recused himself, unable to bear the spectacle. He knew well her guilt, but she was still his sister. Daenerys permitted a fair process, overseen by a new High Septon who sought to restore the faith. In the end, Cersei was stripped of all titles and sentenced to live out her days in confinement, a fate many said was more merciful than she deserved. Some felt she should die for her role in the destruction of countless lives. Others argued that letting her live served as a lesson in the pitfalls of greed and pride. Tyrion, for his part, never visited her cell. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps the finality of seeing her caged would be too painful. In time, with King's Landing secured and the threat of further civil war diminished, Tyrion returned to Casterly Rock. There, he continued his rule. Under the new queen, the Westerlands saw fewer levies demanded, fewer pointless battles. Trade routes flourished. Tyrion worked to foster a sense of normalcy, establishing caravans of grain and goods to supply the capital. Bit by bit, the kingdom mended itself, though scars remained. When winter settled upon the land, the roads were made passable by strategic storehouses of winter feed, an innovation Tyrion had championed. Dorne quieted under a new alliance, the Reach resumed its harvests, the North retained its king in the north but held a wary alliance with Daenerys, especially if the rumors of White Walkers proved true. Through all of this, Tyrion remained vigilant, sure that new threats would rise. But for now, he had achieved something nearly miraculous, a transition of power with minimal destruction from the Lannisters to a Targaryen queen who, for all her flaws, recognized the necessity of compromise. On a clear winter morning, Tyrion stood upon the ramparts of Casterly Rock, gazing out at the sea. The sky shone pale blue, the wind brisk. He wore a thick fur-lined cloak, the cold stinging his cheeks. A raven had arrived that morning with a letter from Daenerys, thanking him for recent shipments of gold and promising to send one of her dragons for a ceremonial visit once the snows cleared. The thought made him chuckle, a dragon perched at Casterly Rock as a guest, not an invader. What a world they lived in. He looked down at the courtyard below, where small folk bustled about their chores. He remembered how once, as a child, he had watched Jaime train with a sword there. He recalled how Tywin's presence had loomed everywhere, like a force of nature. Now, that era was gone, replaced by one of his own making. The imp was the lord, not the scorned child. He had forged a future that might bring peace to his people. He turned from the battlements, cane tapping lightly on the stone floor, and made his way inside, heart heavy and light at once. Heavy for the cost of everything that had led here, the broken loyalties, the sibling betrayals, the father he never pleased. light for the possibility that perhaps, for the first time in a long age, the Westerlands could know lasting stability, free from the yoke of endless royal demands. In the halls illuminated by torches, he passed tapestries that told the story of House Lannister's rise to power, culminating in Tywin's stern visage. Tyrion briefly regarded his father's embroidered likeness, recalling that single moment of approval Tywin had once granted. He felt no triumph in surpassing the man, only a wistful sadness. Yet life moved on, and so did he. Meetings with stewards, councils with local lords, improvements to be made. He had a realm to maintain. He had new laws to consider, laws that might, like Daenerys's reforms, grant more freedoms to small folk and prevent the abuses that once were commonplace. He had to manage trade contracts with the new regime in King's Landing, ensure no petty bandits rose to exploit the transition. The tasks were endless, but he found purpose in them. Where once he drifted in shadows and dusty books, now he guided an entire region, shaping the fates of tens of thousands. As the months passed, a few rebellious voices rose, claiming House Lannister had betrayed the rightful king. But these uprisings were small, easily quelled by reason or a show of force, whichever Tyrion deemed appropriate. He had learned, over the years, that kindness and intimidation worked best in tandem. Foes who insisted on stirring chaos were arrested or, in extreme cases, executed. Yet Tyrion proved more merciful than Tywin ever was, opting for negotiation when possible. The people, he believed, should not suffer needlessly. He also quietly supported certain progressive measures from Daenerys's court, like addressing the plight of orphans left by the war, encouraging the rebuilding of towns ransacked by passing armies, and respecting the faiths of various regions. Whether these changes would last or unravel in future generations was unknown, but Tyrion did his part to nudge the realm forward. Eventually, word arrived that Daenerys might travel north to meet with Jon Snow regarding an existential threat from beyond the wall. Tyrion, mindful of the old stories he had read, felt a tingle of foreboding. If the ancient legends of the White Walkers were true, all their political games might pale before a greater danger. He considered traveling north himself, but chose to remain in the Westerlands for fear that leaving might invite unrest. Perhaps if the threat proved real, they would send word, and he would muster forces to stand with the living against the dead. For now, all he could do was wait, maintaining the fragile peace he had helped forge. He sometimes wondered if, in another life, he would have been at Daenerys' side, guiding her day by day, or if he would have served as her hand, weaving plots in King's Landing. But he knew he belonged at Casterly Rock, where he could ensure his homeland's stability. The Lannister name would no longer conjure only images of brutality and cunning. Perhaps, in time, it would stand for leadership tempered by wisdom. A small legacy, but one Tyrion believed in. In occasional hours of solitude, Tyrion allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction. He pictured the brine-swept courtyards where he once hid from the sight of lords and ladies, reading books on history and warcraft. He pictured the library's dusty scrolls, the hidden passages where he eavesdropped on the great. He thought of how the fortress once loomed over him, unyielding as his father's judgment. Now, by never leaving the rock's orbit, at least not for long, he had gained the vantage he needed to reshape the very fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Had he gone to King's Landing as a mere court functionary, his voice might have been drowned. Staying gave him the chance to become the lion he was meant to be. So it was that Tyrion Lannister, the imp, took his seat on the dais of the Great Hall in Casterly Rock, receiving petitioners with the same fairness and open mind he had honed his entire life. The gold in the vaults under the rock continued to flow, forging new roads, building new ships, ensuring that no matter the storms swirling through Westeros, the Westerlands would stand firm. And at night, sometimes he would climb the ramparts to feel the salt wind on his face. He would watch the moonlight shimmer on the sea below, remembering the boy he had been, dreaming of distant horizons. He had not become a great knight or a lord of shining repute in the songs. His sister still hated him, and his father's ghost likely roamed the halls, grumbling in disapproval. But for once, Tyrion felt that he had used his formidable mind for something beyond mere survival or the pursuit of petty pleasures. He had woven together cunning, empathy, and a willingness to break with tradition to secure a better future for those under his charge. In time, should the White Walkers truly march south and Daenerys call for aid, Tyrion would answer. He knew the realm's survival might depend on every region standing united. If the living triumphed, House Lannister would stand on the winning side of history not as conquerors or villains but as pragmatic protectors of their home. If the living fell, then all these efforts would be as ashes in the wind. But that was a fate not yet written, and Tyrion was ever a man of planning. If an enemy threatened to wipe them all out, he would devise a solution, find a compromise, or, failing that, fight with every resource he possessed. For now, though, there was peace of a sort, fragile, precious, bought by the improbable alliance of a dwarf lord and a dragon queen. A peace that might allow the small folk to rebuild their lives, the fields to grow abundant harvests, and the roads to teem with trade. Tyrion oversaw it all with a watchful eye, a tall goblet of wine often in hand, a sardonic wit on his lips, and the burden of leadership weighing on his shoulders. He was the imp no longer, or at least not primarily. He was a statesman, a judge, a protector, and in some quiet corner of his heart, he took pride in that role. Thus did the story continue, with Tyrion Lannister shaping the future of the Westerlands and indeed of all Westeros in ways unimaginable had he ever set foot in King's Landing as a young man. The chronicle of wars and queens, of dragons and heartbreak rolled onward as it always did, but Tyrion's part in it remained unique. The dwarf who never left the rock at a young age found, in the end, that he had become the rock, solid, unshakable, carrying the burdens of his people. It was not the life he might have chosen in his boyhood dreams, but it was, in its own way, a life of profound consequence and even, on occasion, a quiet form of honor.